Welcome to another episode of the Supply Unchained podcast. My name is Ali Raza and I am the host. I am honored to be joined here today by Mr. Jon Kirkegaard on a Saturday. I promise this is going to be worth your time. Today, our objective is to talk about supply chain as always, but to also seek help from you, the audience, to see how we can evolve the industry. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jon. Jon has been a pioneer in this space from his days at Booz Allen, the company and consulting firm that coined the term supply chain, to his days at i2, doing a lot of the R&D and funding it, then on to VC-backed startups, and now doing interesting stuff with some of the technologies that he's developed for his own industrial businesses in automotive and concrete and other things. And so today, our goal is to walk you through what we think is not only the future, but the immediate need of the industrial base today. And hopefully this is going to be both educational, and we want this to have as many questions as possible. And it's all a learning journey for all of us until this date. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Jon and see how he's doing. So Jon's joining us from Dallas today. Jon, how are things in your ranch?
Fantastic. Look, good morning, everybody. And looking forward to getting a storyline out, but having a conversation about it. So let's jump into it.
Absolutely. And Jon, we've been speaking about this for years, right? So I'm excited about the topics you're going to cover, but what do you think is the need to do it now? And why do you think it's so important? While I pull up the slides to kick things off, or pictures. And these pictures are just meant to be visual, right? It's going to be a casual conversation. So if you have any questions, feel free to post it in the LinkedIn Live channel and we'll move it forward. But what do you think is the need now versus maybe 20 years ago when you were seeing some of the advents of supply chain technology?
It's a great question, and I don't think there's any less need than there has been for 40 or 50 years. The challenge is, on the surface, the value proposition for a tightly woven, synchronized, agile sales and operations planning supply chain is enormously financially attractive, operational attractive, job satisfaction attractive. But we've had some really interesting times the last 20, 25 years where a lot of things have been pushed into the market, marketing that capability, but really are islands of automation that don't conform or allow for flow of manufacturing and synchronization activities. So post-COVID, and now, from even a national defense perspective, I think the average person, not the average expert, the average person realizes there's something very out of place. We've been very focused on the right solutions for decades. So I think the time is really good to introduce a way to bridge the gap and get the train back on the tracks.
Yeah, on that note, talk to me about this digital invisible hand, right? So you've been harking at Adam Smith theories to me for a couple of years now that this is the way we should be going. What is it? I mean, why does it apply to supply chain tech? And what would the user essentially get out of today's session that they're spending a Saturday looking at?
Yeah, that's very important. Is we can promise you that if you can absorb and follow along with us, we'll give you capabilities that don't require any outside resource, that can really reshape your career, add tremendous EVA, actual financial return for your business or your client's business, simplify the solutions, enable the foundation for the current wave of Harry Potter magic out of the IT world of AI. Support people and really design products to be successful. And to that point, what we'll try to do today is walk through this storyline rather quickly, so we get the whole story out of what we've seen happen in the last 2 or 3 decades and what can be done. And then come back and dig deep based on where the audience sees interest, questions, skepticism, whatever it may be. And with that, I would open it up with a question. And I don't know if I'll see the answers initially, but I think one of our 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 sponsors here can help us out. But I'd really like to know up front what people believe is the magic one or two or three things that would really get their supply chains flowing, their value created, and competitive advantage started. So, with that, let's start with the first slide.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, talk to me about Adam Smith and why this is the way to go versus the centralization of technologies that we've been seeing recently in the last two
Yeah.
decades in our space.
Well, as a gentleman that pursued engineering and a master's degree in finance, I think my first very high level graduate finance professor just preached Adam Smith and the invisible hand, and the whole notion, if the audience isn't familiar with it, is just the founding fathers' concept of free market economics. Is rather than central coordination, when you create a need that generates wealth for the participants, coordination of the masses happens based on a bit, if not a lot, of self-interest that gets coordinated. And so, what what the disconnect that I've always seen, being an early, I guess I could call it an early founder of a lot of the APS technology, from early manugistics, my Booz Allen days, to helping write and create a lot of the APS technology at I2, and then our own solutions, is I've always been a huge advocate of sales and operations planning, which is more process enabled by technology, not technology. And what we see in almost all the current market offerings in APS is very much a top down command and control, my way or the highway plan, with really little or no features to interoperate with other plans. So if you go to any of the market offerings, you just go down the Rolodex of companies, their solution to solve a problem is that everybody has to run their product in a single instance under a single planner to plan the entire supply chain, which, if you believe in free market economics, if you understand business at all, is just not, it's not feasible. It's just it's silly, but it is reality.
So what's the alternative, John, right? And speak to me on why this automation of S&OP became a thing, and this 100% vision of tech, where, as you pointed out, S&OP is not just it's not technology, it's a people, process, technology piece. What's the alternative, and why do you think it doesn't work?
Well, let's just keep moving quickly so we get through the overview and come back and dig deep. But the need is for request and promise in a way that you can speak about constraints and manufacturing and flow. That's not collaboration on email. That's collaboration with numbers, and it's generally time phase numbers. Um, as this picture annotates, I mean, a planned economy like our friends in China, they can quickly follow a need and orchestrate resources based on essentially the penalty of law. Versus, our open market, the invisible hand from Adam Smith is phenomenal, but as we'll get into later, the invisible hand needs a helping hand, and it's missing today. So let's move on.
So on that note, could you just define for the audience request upon promise, so everybody's clear on that definition?
Well, I was first talking about requesting and promising. So, very simply put, we build one of our businesses. We build patented, make it enabled concrete and steel, industrial manufacturing facilities and houses. And so, let's just say that I need a certain number of coils of steel bent into certain tubing, right? And I request a quantity every week for the next 10 weeks. I request it in that array, and then I need a response from my steel manufacturer or fabricator. Can they do 10 a week, or can they do 5 a week? And that conversation first happens before I lock down a plan, and then the plan becomes commitments to a customer. That's what I mean by request and promise, and later we'll get into ATP, available to promise. But this next image, and I hate to even call what we have as slides, because we're really having a discussion, and these pictures are just kind of a way for Ollie and I to stay on topic and give you an image to kind of reflect what the concept we're trying to get across is. And this concept is extremely important to understand. And having been deep inside tech industries, doing big deals with Microsoft and running technology, you got to understand every tech exec has no interest but to push their platform at the exclusion of anything else. And Wall Street rewards them massively for that kind of, I call it the Hotel California model. You can check in, but you can't ever leave. And I tell people all the time, if we're selling video games or accounting software or some other functional software, maybe that's not really a problem. But in supply chain, it's an absolute non-starter, because what we're trying to do in supply chain is, as you're a big fan of Ellie Goldratt, as I am, I have an industrial manufacturing background and design supply chain. We're trying to create flow. And if you can't, if every product, every supply chain technology product, and every platform it's built on, they don't talk, which is absolute reality today, how the heck can you how the heck can you expect information to flow, let alone product and physical product? And so today we literally have a bigger problem than we did 20 years ago.
So what you're saying, John, is if the goal was to have more output and flow, then why are we still on this trajectory, right? And why has the definition of success changed over the last 10 to 15 years to what it used to be, which was physically measured at the time?
Well, this is something I feel really passionate about, and I don't mean to offend the accountants in the audience, but we've taken what we created at Booz Allen and the whole notion of supply chain when we were early on the scene was an alternative way to look at the flow of cash and the flow of material in your manufacturing or even non-manufacturing business, because GAAP accounting and accrual accounting, and especially in public markets, is massively manipulated. One of my heroes in life is Joel Stern of the Stern Stewart firm, father of EVA, and famous article, Earnings Per Share Don't Matter, which is horrible for an investor to not know what's really going on. But if you think about it, if you have a CFO and a CEO that are constantly manipulating GAAP accounting to show what's going on Wall Street, and they're literally trying to turn off and turn on Lucy and the Chocolate Factory in manufacturing, which has enormous lead times for setup and change, you just literally kill the manufacturing thing, and you kill morale and you kill flow. And unfortunately, the countification of what we call supply chain the last 20 years has gotten really strong, when what we really need are 3D, 4D chess players that realize that making things is a big assembly coordination effort, where you put a Boeing airplane together from thousands, maybe tens of thousands of suppliers that build things independently and have to be coordinated. And that's just not the same approach.
Yeah, it's been a challenge here in New York convincing the top about the value of going back to the manufacturing side. But speak to me on like the global economy, right? What does this mean? I get calls all the time from Fortune 500 saying they have inventory problems. If you keep going this way, why do we get these $13 trillion of buffers that just continue to grow and impact sustainability and the bottom line?
Yeah, this is a metric I put together a couple of years ago. It's much larger than this now, and this doesn't even fully account for it. But I think the global economy is like $113 trillion, and global economists estimate there's $13 to $20 trillion of inventory buffers, working capital buffers, and probably as much of that is of wasted, unused capacity, because plants are either over capacity or under capacity. Like a hotel room that doesn't sell tonight, you can't sell it tomorrow. But the important message here, which maybe this picture doesn't capture, is over the last 20 years, these buffers have gotten bigger, not smaller, in every industry. And if all this technology we've been spending money on, all this, I won't mention brands, but you all know the dozens of top supply chain tech brands, as well as the smaller firms. if all this technology was really addressing the problem, these buffers would be coming way down, not going up.
So what's going on? I mean, people are signing up by the records for these systems, right? And we know what the end result is. So, I mean, what is the solution, I guess?
Well, we're not quite to the solution yet, but we know like any good consulting diagnostic, you follow a scientific method, right? You create a hypothesis, you observe facts and findings, and then you start to assemble them. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, when I left I2 I was recruited by Battery Ventures to start a firm called Velocity, which had just purchased the largest EIA vendor in the world called Frontech. Some amazing capability, and then we built probably the first visibility platform, Velocity, on top of it, and I hand built that with a team. There was a lot of interest in understanding that heterogeneous messaging platform data integration was a big deal. And today that's almost non-existent. The big technology firms over the middle 2000s today, they've sold the business world that cloud is synonymous with connectivity, and it's just a complete lie. When you have 82,000 different clouds out there, that doesn't mean they connect any bit better than on-premises systems. So today, there's not one, and I mean this, I seriously open to any proof if I'm wrong, but there is not one single supply chain planning technology that can ingest another plan and absorb it and consolidate it with their plan to improve. There might be a couple that if the other plan is on their same platform, they can do something. It's limited, but that's how the real world works, and that's why 80-90% of the world plans their actual flow with spreadsheets and email. So this platform, this blob platform where all the companies are trying to have everybody run on their technology has a fundamental, irrefutable damage to industrial America.
And again, to your point, right? Everybody's sort of taking care of their house, but they're not they don't care about tying it upstream or downstream. So that ecosystem problem just exists. So then, I mean, how do we move from just fixing these potholes, which is basically what I run into a lot? We're just like, hey, we're just looking for this one little thing, versus building that high-speed train infrastructure that everybody in yesteryears was focused on improving flow, like Goldratt and Ono and Sheward and people before him.
Yeah. Well, and this picture, I guess, could have various meanings, but we're back to flow, right? We need that high-speed train, but we're not back to Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, the invisible hand. We can't beat top-down predatory nations like China by becoming China. We have to use what is our competitive differentiation, and it has been for 250 years, which is our free market world and our free market economy. And so we have to find a way to allow independent business to prosper, but yet synchronize into a network of networks of flow of manufacturing. Today, that last slide, we have thousands of applications, and I'll pick on Gartner a little bit. We have thousands of applications pushed and prodded by firms like Gartner to create these little sub-markets, and none of them connect. It's just silly. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I call it the Istanbul problem, right? Where just like 7 to 10 civilizations have come through, put their mark on there, and there's just no zoning. Could call it the Houston problem too. But speak to me on that note, right? Which is the trains still have to run.
Right.
What can be done about it?
And this is something I'm more than passionate about. And all of our technology we've built over the years, we actually built asynchronous technology where we could use a spreadsheet as a real spreadsheet, not a something that looks like it, asynchronously, and check it in and out of different plans and consolidate plans, and a capability that we've done an incredible amount of work to make work. Nobody else does it. I think it should be a standard feature out of Microsoft and .NET and Google Docs and as we talked about, the big technology platforms. That's the last thing they want. They want that check-in, you can't ever leave, Eagles Hotel California notion. But in reality, in all the clients I've interfaced with the last 15, 20 years, the way they really get the job done is they tell their senior management that they're planning their supply chains with all these expensive ERP systems and APS systems. In reality, there's a small group of people that email spreadsheets in and around, especially when they're working with what I call outside routings, outside contract manufacturers, resources. And they keep the train on the tracks with essentially these arrays of production, forecast, demand, and responses to them. The problem is there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is it just doesn't go far enough in that the technology really needs to have a way to fix Humpty Dumpty. You remember the old nursery rhyme? Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, and all the king's horses couldn't put him back together again. We need to use technology. Go ahead.
We have some questions coming in. Do you want to take them, or do you want to continue on with the pictures?
Sure. Let's fire. Let's take some questions.
Yeah. No. So the first question came in. It says, how have economists missed this accumulated working capital risk and not diagnosed the problem is linked to gap accounting? So.
Well, we live in a world controlled by. I remember the first CFO that I worked tightly with in a division of Halliburton used to walk up and down the hallway every day talking about the golden rule, and that is the man with the gold makes the rules. and unfortunately, I learned that all too well. I spent a couple of years at Coopers and Lybrand and got pulled in to actually automate the audit. Right, it's a whole nother discussion. The accounting world of our business environment in public companies has just gotten too much power, and it's tied up in Wall Street. It's tied up in making money. It's tied up in manipulating the public perception of what is a good business. It doesn't fool Warren Buffett. It doesn't fool the top 3 or 5% of companies, but the median of people don't really understand the difference between EVA, cash flow, working capital, treasury, and accounting, and especially accrual accounting, where the timing of cash in and cash out, not cash, but the timing of expenses and receipts can be manipulated to try to manipulate stock price. The one metric that you can go back and I tell everybody to follow out of GAAP accounting is return on assets. If you go to macro trends and type in a company's ticker symbol and ROA, you can see their ROA trend over 10 to 20 years, and it doesn't lie. I mean, return on assets as reported by GAAP accounting has almost a 1-to-1 correlation to stock price.
Yeah, we'll come back to this. And to your point, right, the stuff that I learned in undergrad Wharton for finance, accounting, marketing, there still seems to be this disconnect that we're trying to bridge the gap to. And I think that's a good transition into, well, what is the solution and what is this analogy you're using? Because for the last 20, 25 years, everybody's focused on building a massive control tower information repositories. You're proposing a different solution to this, which other industries have successfully used. And you're questioning, well, why are we not doing that in supply chain?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's beyond that. I mean, if I were what people call a supply chain analyst or some strat consultant, like I started, or not started, but it was early in my career, I would give you theories on how things should be done, right? I'm not. I'm a doer. I understand technology. I understand the problem and the human factors of it. And I've invested probably 35 years, 7 patents in what I'm about ready to describe, tested it in numerous clients and rolling it out in key clients in our own industrial business right now. And essentially what we call make it, is essentially a way to use technology to keep the assembly coordination, which is the planning bill materials done by independent businesses, making them interoperable so that you can push them apart and get commitments and here are constraints, and then reassemble them in much less cycle time than a human staying up all night trying to reassemble 82 spreadsheet responses. And generally, a human won't even try to do that. What the reason all those big buffers exist is because the human can't do it. And in reality, you don't get fired for having too much inventory, but boy, you don't have the right, Nike shoe on the right promotion date. Boom, you're gone, right? So what's the natural tendency of a human is to overstock when you can't see clarity. We call it overriding when we kind of do sales and operations diagnostics. So,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And so I think that's a good transition. We'll come back to this because I know we can spend the entire hour on just looking at that. And if you are listening to the audience, go ahead and just type into your GPT how does make it production orchestration compared to IDE packets, and it's fascinating what it comes up with. But coming back to that economics, question from earlier. Okay, so invisible hand, why do we go for it? And in the digital world, like what do we need to enable that invisible hand?
Well, I circle back to the invisible hand for national defense. I mean, just think about what we now have in a national defense production system. There's nobody that can predict what the next weapon is that's going to change the battlefield. What we have to have is a sausage factories. We have to have the production, or as a quote I read recently said, without industrial production, there is no sovereignty, right? But all of our technology that's been rolled out, and I'm gonna pick on the technology world, and I think for good reason, is they love control, and they love the fact of rolling out a platform they control that's top down. We got to have a technology world that uses the supply chain use case as the superset, the super requirement, more like the telecom router example we're going to go into for Make It. It's missing. It was there 20 years ago. It's been cut off at the knees by greed and the platform world. And if we unleash the ability for independent business to yet connect once, but been synchronized with all the other partners and suppliers and fulfillment, you can just run circles around planned economies, a la China. And that's critical for national defense. It's critical for jobs. It's critical for industrial production in the United States and all the Western world.
Yeah, John, I agree with you. I mean, I was working on something yesterday. It was a prompt for NATO, but again, it's this command and control with a complete disconnect, or just they don't even acknowledge the supply chain piece for endurance. So that brings us to a good transition, right? So what are you proposing, John? Like, what is Make It? Why does this work? Why does it not compete with the blobs? Why does it get more out of the blobs? Speak to me more about why this is sort of the missing link. Yeah.
So let's transition from the military. I mean, you and I have had some discussions together with the military, admirals and generals, and they're all massively concerned about the push to AWS or Azure single platforms. Think about the single point of failure from a military standpoint. And one of the critical things of difference about our military is the ability to push responsibility down, even when they lose comms. They know what to do and have authority to do it. This applies to your supply chain. When I outsource production of a TSCM chip or assembly for a car, and I need it pulled into the final assembly, I don't tell my supplier or my contract manufacturer how to accomplish that. I give them an attainment I need to meet. How they meet it is up to them. And therefore, what I need to be able to do is give them essentially a wish list in quantitative form and have them respond to it and constantly respond to it and request and promise it. So what Make It is the unplatform. It is the absolute antithesis, corollary to the technology world. We're creating an environment where I don't care what spreadsheet you use, I don't care what advanced planning system you use, what embedded planning system and ERP system. we create essentially a standard packet, like a internet router packet of what that plan array is, and we can push and pull it in any form to other planning and scheduling systems, rapidly inculcate it, ingest it, respond to it, push it back. So the nice thing about what Make It represents and the way we've engineered it, and I think we're up to 6 patents around what we're doing, which we openly will share with anybody who wants to solve this problem, not push the wrong technology, is that it is the UNPUT platform. It breaks the assembly coordination free. It unchains the Adam Smith wealth of nations and dramatically lowers the cycle time to plan what production is, deal with change. I think the latest buzz term and everybody writing about supply chain is agility. And agility in manufacturing is all backed into what this picture represents.
Yeah, and then speaking to this picture, right? Talk to me about how this takes Adam Smith from a little shop doing it versus everybody who can access this and do the whole available for promise, and also deal with the inventory buffers, which was the second question that actually popped up, which I think you already addressed for the most part, which is why do we have way more committed to their suppliers than their customers were to them during shortages of 2021? So explain. Go ahead.
Again, the concept here, the concept of Make It generically is a network, a decentralized network, encrypted, secure communication. So I don't share everything with everybody, right? I know who gets what, but it's not emails I'm sharing. I'm not saying, hey, Ollie, can you make some stuff for me? And you go, yeah, I can make stuff for you. No, the language of business and the language of production planning, supply chain planning is arrays. It's a number of units over time with bucketed timestamps, right? That's just non-existent in the world today. The only way all the major APS vendors deal with that is they say, oh, crap, you got all these plants, you just all need to run my stuff. Well, and what they don't even tell you is you run all their stuff. They don't even have a way for 82 different versions of their same product to coordinate these time phase arrays, right? So the missing ingredient is, I call it quantitative, collaborative arrays, right? And the ability not only to create this and make it independent, much like an internet router packet makes a Cisco or Juniper router interoperate, even though they're completely independent businesses. It also fuels the.
Can you just get into the concept of how a time phased array works, just for the people who are trying to get into the nuts and bolts? So why is that a better approach than just dumping data into a big repository, which we'll get to, and we'll get to some examples as well, so people can sort of digest.
Everybody on this call has heard of MRP, right? And it generally stands for managing really poorly, right? But it's not the MRP that's bad. It's not the algorithm MRP. It's the way it's fixed in a modal, trapped in a space inside an ERP system where you can't use it. But what a time phase algorithm does, whether it's in DRP or MRP or APS or SNOP, is it's taking a bucketed demand and it's calculating based on a planning bill of material, not the engineering bill of material, the planning bill of material, which is simpler. What are the lead times for the hard? If we take a computer, what's the lead time for the hard drive, the lead time for the keyboard, the CPU? And it's saying, okay, based on those lead times, when do I have to get things moving to be available for the final assembly? And that's not that difficult, but then everything always changes. So in that time phasing, you have all these net changes that take place. And it's not, you don't need a quantum computer to calculate it, but it's the type of thing, it's like the CPLEX algorithm you learned in graduate school or in engineering school. You can't do it in your head, right? So it's a great application for a computer. It's very transparent. It's very peggable. And that just needs to extend outside one company's APS system and be extensible across dozens, thousands of them and that interoperate.
And to that point, right, John, as you know, speaking of MRP, just and all these existing systems, they're optimizing a function or a silo, right? So why doesn't it work? Why do these constraints exist outside of the business? And I guess this comes back to that second question: why do we have to build inventory buffers? And we talk a lot about Toyota and how their production is sort of the gold standard.
Well, that's a great example.
Yeah.
That's a great example. I mean, there's nothing better than the Toyota production system of enabling people and Kanban inside a plant, but it just doesn't work outside of a plant. I mean, you can have the greatest Kanban system in the world, but if the wheels that are got to show up to put on the Peterbilt truck don't show up, I can't roll it, I can't move it down the assembly line. I've got a disaster on my hand, right? So the additional compounding network effect and benefit of what we're talking about is I got to find some way to understand what's happening outside my domain of control in my supply base, my multi-level supply base. And generally, that's where your big constraints are. So the concept of make it, and I'm not trying to sell make it. The concept of decentralized network collaboration of quantitative production plans it breaks that bullwhip effect. And if there ever was a concept in supply chain that kind of nails it down, and every Wall Street Journal or writer comes back to the toilet paper problem in COVID, or the tulip problem in the 1600s or whatever, you break the bullwhip effect by communicating. You communicate in parallel. You don't communicate serially up and down the supply chain like you play in the beer game, right? You communicate one to many, many to many, up and down the supply chain, what the change in demand patterns are. And I can give you thousands of examples with client work. And that's again where the real constraints are, right? You can have the greatest four-wall factory in the world, but if you don't have the ability to measure and understand what's going on outside the four walls, you're not going to be successful.
And so to that point, John, and we've been looking at the market for decades. Everybody seems to write a book or explain the problem, but they never get to the solution. And we've sort of spoken to this in detail, right? And even what we do is we'll find a bottleneck and say, let's start optimizing it physically. But what is the new solution approach, right? Because I think that's sort of the missing piece of every panel that I've ever seen or read about on an article.
Right. The first thing is I don't, as a consumer, which I try to think of anything I offer to the market, I try to first think as a consumer, or if I was a consultant, or what would I want? And I ask that question up front of the audience, what are your needs? And I'll be curious to get the thoughts, and then the thoughts as we get to this point, does your ideal solution change a bit?
Yeah.
But what I need is a capability that is the unplatform, right? I don't want another software vendor walking in saying, gee, your stuff sucks, let's start over again, which is pretty much 100% of what they all will come in and say, right? No. I need something that walks in and says, I don't care if you use spreadsheets, I don't care if you use an embedded MRP and SAP, I don't care if you use some off the walls, very specific chemical process manufacturing packaging solution. I can create interoperability between the demand side and the supply side, and I can help create that supply and demand balance. And therefore, I can predict forward-looking income statement and balance sheets, and I can keep those buffers down because I can quickly manage changes in agility to market changes. And we've touched on it before, but that's where that quantitative, collaborative network effect capability to complement my static, centralized technology I have in place. To me, that's just a tremendous change management tool. And in fact, it's really what you use spreadsheets for today. Yeah. How does everybody create the spreadsheet they share? They dump it out of some system so they can share it. The problem is they can't comment on it and re-import.
Yeah, it's been like that at least for the last 12 years, 15 years I've been at it. So so let's move on to more. Yeah, I mean, I've been around on the commercial side 15 years, but so let's move on to more interesting concepts and also just scale it up a little bit, right? So talk to me about tariffs. This seems to be the strategy today, but what are the limitations of tariffs, and why does this even overcome some of the short-term solutions like tariffs,
Well,
especially within. Yeah, go ahead.
I, that's a great topic, and let me kind of bring it up to a higher perspective, which is I think tariffs are absolutely a good idea in the short term. But what I don't think is tariffs should be a long-term solution. And what I'd love to see out of our military leaders and our administration leaders is the understanding that the technology that's really going to save the day for our economy is not AI technology. It's not computer technology. It's the technology of manufacturing. It's the technology of supply chain, which is really deeply embedded into two core pillars, which is the planning bill of material and the time and lead time around it. And I would love to see when people talk about we need this tariff for this industry for whatever reason, I'd love to see on the other hand, hey, we're putting in place this collaborative Adam Smith network of sharing so that this industry, whether it's the furniture industry or the technology industry or the latest has been the telecom industry, is we can make our industry so much more wildly profitable and productive over a planned economy. And that's to me is the tariff should be a temporary capability to reset the clock and declare an emergency effort. Unfortunately, I don't think that's what we're doing. And I'd love to help anybody who would like to make that next leap.
So, John, I think this we're actually getting more questions come in. I think this picture is timely, right? So, there's questions obviously coming in from the how do these packets move, email, API, EDI. So, maybe just speak to how Make It, the unplatform, does it, right? And just use that analogy. And again, there's patents out there. So, if you want to dive deeper for some of the audience, there's about 6 or 7 patents around it. But at a high level, John, just maybe explain how you're able to bring these production plans, schedules, forecast spreadsheets, anything that has timestamp data to create this time phase array together to allow for better available to promise performance.
Right. So we've done this without decentralized network computing for all of our clients since 2000. I mean, we create production planning, sales and operations planning, where we could push out from a big centralized database. We call it a planning services repository. So we could take a contract manufacturer's participation and we could kick that out and we put it in a spreadsheet and we make it available that they could download and respond to, right? And I call that more of a defensive approach, and it works, and it adds a tremendous amount of value. What we've done with our patents in the last, really since 2015 or so, is we've said, well, how do we turn this into an offensive approach? How do we create a decentralized network, encrypted, private permission or public network, so that whatever are these key constraints that need to be shared, they are automatically shared to the interested network. So let's say you got Boeing and their suppliers and participants. So when Boeing changes the build to order schedule for 787, that master plan propagates immediately, and everybody knows what their participation, what their planning bill of material participation is, right? So that can happen on any technology. We can push that out over traditional EDI networks. We can push it out over blockchain networks. We can push it out any flavor of a blockchain network. We can push it out of all kinds of sophisticated decentralized networks. Our patents are generic, so covering on any platform. And then we have very specific platforms that we provide today and work to test and approach. So whether it's done mechanically, defensively, or it's done more offensively with a intertwined, secured, communicating, decentralized network, the impacts on your EVA, your cash flow, your finances are enormous.
And to that point, right? So for some of the IT people looking at this, naturally the first question they're going to say is there an API for this? So speak to me on maybe just bridging the gap between IT and operations. And again, the common goal, as you're alluding to, is like we should all be working towards that Adam Smith invisible hand for our corporations and society and as a greater whole, right? So speak to me about like how everybody needs to sort of get involved in this. And even though there's these sunk costs on these, digital islands, which I get calls about, hey, we have $3.5 billion of inventory now sitting because we've been buffering against it. How does it
Yeah,
work?
well,
Yeah.
well, because of some of our early deployments at SNOP in a decentralized manner for Siemens and Chiquita and Sony and other clients, we have APIs into Oracle, different versions of Oracle and SAP and various planning systems and various spreadsheet planning systems, and they're all fairly generic. So yeah, the first thing I would work with anybody in the supply chain technology planning world is make that that AP, once the plan changes arrive in your inbox at your node, how you inculcate that and respond to it, whether it's with a human or a spreadsheet or a planning system, that's quite simple. So I would love to make sure every technology can do that. And it's quite simple. And then I forgot the rest of your question, Ollie.
No, I think it's a good transition because you were talking about defensive versus offensive, right? So, as you know, everybody's playbook sort of looks like this right now. And, I posted this a couple of days ago and I got so much traffic back from the Databricks and the Palantir types. But tell me how this can be better, right? Because I think people mistook it as.
Well, I can't speak with pure authority on what Palantir absolutely does. I know a lot because of people I know that have worked there or interviewed there or worked on the projects. And one thing I can say for certain is they do not try to show up with a piece of software and convince you what their software does is your problem, which is pretty much what all the supply chain planning vendors do. And it's horrific, right? What Palantir does do is they have very talented technical people that have some business sense. They plop on ground to start figuring out what data is where and how to organize it. And I call this a very strong defensive approach. So my understanding is they have technology like TIBCO, EIA products embedded in their Foundry platform. So at least before they try to apply artificial intelligence, they have some notion that the data they're working with is valid, it's well timed, it's synchronized, and I applaud them for that. But that is a very defensive approach, and that's not going to work on a scale to solve supply chain problems. We've got to have that data in a synchronized form, sitting ready and available when needed, and that's what the Make It kind of telecom router synchronization notion does.
And I think this is where we typically would lose half the audience because, the natural approach is, okay, how do we get into AI? But you're making the case on the next slide that, hey, it's the ATP that you need to go to first, and then AI might be used for better business models. So speak to me about that. Why do you think that?
Well, this relates right back to the Palantir discussion. Is in all of our clients, before we do any kind of SNOP or production planning or supply chain planning, we build we call planning services database. It has all the different versions of the execution data. It has all the different scrub data. It has all the planning versions scrubbed and synchronized in time, so that before we try to run a weekly plan, we know that the data is not disjointed. And we even in our SNOP solution, we even made it possible that if the planner has insight about a key execution data that's changed, he can change it in the planning spreadsheet and push it back to the repository so the plan's correct. Very bi-directional data sync. And what we discovered on every client is our SNOP plans had a tremendous impact on the business. But you know what people would come up and tell me in the halls, is they go, John, this is the first time I've been able to go one place and see what's going on the execution side. So in some respects, they don't really, if there's an order for 10 of a constrained product, and there's only 5 in stock, they can go see where the other 5 might be, right? They don't need to go to a planner or go to the grand poobah of constrained inventory. And so I'd make the case that, supply chain is quite simple. Available promise logic, which is, what's the demand, what's available in financial inventory, what's available in extended financial inventory, what's available non-owned but available inventory, what are in transits, and more than anything, in a build to order environment, when is the next batch to be produced, or when can I have it produced? You don't need AI for that. What you need AI for is when you get that problem solved. Now AI can be a tremendous capability to create business models that are phenomenal, right? And we have in our one of our patents, we call it time-based pricing, and we've used it on every client we've ever worked with. Is we have the same SKU that's called ABC, and when you sell it off the shelf, it's $10. If you give us time in a postponed assembly operation to get it out in 2 or 3 weeks, it's maybe $8.50. And if you give us time, a couple months to build it to order, and not carry any working capital for it, it may be as little as $6. And what almost everybody fails when I ask the question is which model makes the most money? And almost everybody will say, well, that model where you sell it for 100% market off the shelf is the best money. And it's not. If you understand all these things we talked about of treasury, of working capital and resources, if I can build to order where I never use any of my own capital, even though the margin on the actual product appears less, my return on assets is almost infinite. And that's how we took, I think the division of Siemens we worked with had $500 million of excess working capital. We took it down to 10, and we took their inventory turns from like 8 to 50. And we made them supplier of the year. And the big trick was we drop shipped 80% of the product directly from the manufacturing side, which had no impact on working capital. If you take what we've been talking about and wrap it into a concept we call forward visibility, then you can do this in any product where you can look forward, like yield management in an airline. You can start to find ways to fill up capacity that you may not normally use. It's like the metaphor I used earlier. If I can't sell last night's hotel room that was left vacant.
Yeah, dollar today versus dollar tomorrow. So, John, let's maybe move on to some tangible, examples of Make It. So we can speak to TubeCrete. So you already spoke about how you're coordinating stuff there, and it's so much faster and cheaper. This has obviously been making the news over the last week or so. So speak to me about this human supply chain with the actuators. Like, where would Make It help a lot of companies like this? And there's a lot of Silicon Valley backed companies that do the design and then they sort of figure out the supply chain later. Where does Make It fill into this example? Maybe we'll scale it up to something else.
Well, I think even 30 years ago, doing this kind of work, a lot of companies were kind of vertically integrated, at least a little bit, or thought they were, right? I don't think anybody that makes things anymore believes they're vertically integrated. They're all horizontally organized to essentially assemble components largely made by others, or at least other divisions of their own business. And this humanoid robot interest, to me, is an extreme example of it. I'll bet you there's not one product on that humanoid robot that's not available in industrial automation today, used for other things, whether it's gears or actuators or chips or plastic components. But the form of it and the timing of it is going to be very different based on the volume and the production. So I think I pulled this picture from a Wall Street Journal article talking about the actuator for the shoulder of humanoid robots looks like it's going to be the big constraint for supply chain. So back to your Ellie Goldratt constraint theory 101, the Herbie of that robot could be one gold tip screw or one actuator, and you could pile up all the parts you want in front of Elon Musk's assembly plant in Austin. But if you can't get that one part, you've destroyed your working capital. You can't deliver per product. Start applying that to industry, and particularly apply that to defense contractors, and how almost every defense munition is got a big high-tech component in it anymore.
So let's speak to on national sovereignty, right? So we were just talking about one little production line, one maybe startup, but how does this scale to the level of trillions of dollars? I mean, the defense budget is supposed to be $1.5 trillion now. So like, where does Make It plug in there? And obviously the big blobs are are part of that
Well,
ecosystem for many years.
let me hit that one head on, right? With the howitzer, right? And I've done enough work with you and without you, with defense contractors and Pentagon officials to realize the defense contractors have the Pentagon trapped, right? They purposely don't provide any transparency into the production of said munition. The only way the Defense Department has control over weapons is when they buy them and they put them on the shelf. And then they have very good ability to swap and allocate and move them around the world, but they don't have any insight to the flow of production out of a Raytheon or out of a Lockheed or smaller contractors, even the new ones, the Andurils or whatever. So we're back to Henry Ford and World War II, where my understanding is Henry Ford was producing B-17 bombers within 3 days of the declaration of war on Pearl Harbor because he was prepared, right? And what I would propose to Pentagon officials and to national defense contractors is we need to create that Adam Smith, decentralized transparency of forward visibility of production into the defense world. And the defense world is not one person makes one thing. I mean, if you've ever studied how a F-35 fighter gets made, I mean, basically the prime doesn't do anything but assemble components made by thousands of little job shops, right? And those job shops are need to be informed and in parallel understanding of the flow, and many defense components get pulled together to create a tank or create an airplane. And so the coordination of all these little components into the final assembly needs to be transparent. It needs to be back to all we talked about, the quantitative collaboration, that planning bill of material. And if you do that, all of a sudden the key capability is the production system, not the individual component, because I'm not enough of a military strategist to tell you what the next weapon that's going to win a conflict is. I can damn well tell you it's not something we even know about today. And so having the sausage factory to make it is way more important than having somebody in Lockheed say, I can build more F-35s, because the next plane isn't going to be an F-35. Go ahead.
So what you're saying right now is that even if the Defense Production Act wasn't enacted, there is no defense production system that could probably keep up with quadruple production, whatever it is.
Well, but if the defense production system were enacted like it was for respirators during COVID, people take over. And it's obvious that people can do this. I had a great, like a grandfather to me, a second cousin who actually was an industrial engineer in the Boeing plant during World War II, that told me how it got done, right? And I've read books and understanding people can do this. And I think if a Defense Production Act gets enacted, all of a sudden people with spreadsheets and phone calls and emails take over, and they push it through and make it happen. We need the technology to support those people. Today, the technology fights against those people. And that's what's sad. The technology that all these vendors push out are isolated islands that don't talk. They make the coordination harder, not easier.
And to that, John, and you mentioned some of your results with Siemens earlier. So proof is in the pudding. So what have you done with your approaches, technologies? And again, I need to hark on this, that this is not a software technology part alone. This is a solution as part of a greater effort, right? So speak to me on like what your customers have been seeing. I know you use your own systems to do incredible things with Tube Create and some of your other businesses in automotive, but what are people getting compared to, the control tower approach of tracking?
Yeah, well, the first principles is it's very logical. If I can synchronize collapse cycle time out of planning cycle time, and I can use less resources and produce more output, every measurement you can imagine, from inventory turns to return on assets to return on capital deployed to working capital to inventories, is going to have a better metric around it. I think the best way I can document is we've taken Make It and this build to order concept, and we've embedded it in our entire design for Tubecrete, where we build industrial manufacturing, reshoring manufacturing facilities. We're building lots of houses. We build industrial buildings. And we basically have three raw materials, which is rolls of galvanized steel, special high-tech plants that make aerated autoclave concrete, some key technology and acrylic stucco systems, and a few fasteners, and we can build anything. So in the end, we can build a house for half the cost of framing it in crazy finger jointed wood. We can build a traditional steel structure that might be built in red iron for a third of the cost. We can build a concrete and steel structure that competes with a tilt slab building for a fifth of the cost. And we can do it much faster, and with literally no waste. And I think that concept can be applied to any industry, and every industry we've applied it to, we've had similar results. But the results are compounded if you do the due diligence to design the product around the supply chain, which nobody does today. The other big problem is the supply chain. Most people in corporate America think supply chain is Uncle Fred pushing boxes in the warehouse, or Joe driving a truck, and that's not supply chain. That's logistics. It's very important stuff, but it's not this coordination of lead times and balancing of assets. Go ahead.
Yeah, and John, to that note, right? So hopefully everyone who joined in today, you can see that solutions like this exist in the U.S., right, and probably all over the world as well. But where we need help is obviously taking this to the next level, right? So from your perspective, obviously the next step is calling you and saying, hey, let's have a discussion on how we can speed up X, Y, Z, quadruple production, whatever it is. But from your perspective, what are next steps? As just individual prospective leads, as a country, as an industrial base, like where do we go from here?
Yeah, as all you and I talked about, we wanted to make this as educational as possible, and so regardless of what we do at DC area or what Ollie does at the throughput, or what we do together, you can start putting these concepts to use tomorrow, right? First thing is you make it clear to your audience, your company, your capability that there's a difference between computer technology and manufacturing technology. And so we've given you a good taste of what the manufacturing lead time S&OP balancing technology is, and you really got to understand that, right? Two is you got to start asking the big technology platforms to change their ways. They are selling you Hotel California models, trying to lock you up in annuitized payments to drive up their stock price. And like I said, if they're building video games, more power to them. But it doesn't work in this field. They've got to create capabilities that are interoperable, request and promise, fully transparent. They got to do it. And the first step is you as a consumer of this technology, you got to ask it. Now, I would make the case that, our decades of work and our 7 patents on this area, we could really help anybody get it done faster, better, and cheaper with a little bit or a lot of our help. But get it done regardless. I don't care how you do it. And then if there's a fallback approach, which anybody can do, which is we'd be happy to share our planning services repository, schemas and designs, at least create the notion of a data lake that is the true center for your extended ecosystem. It won't be perfect. It won't be timed perfect, but don't keep pushing forward that your ERP system or some APS database is your all-encompassing view of your ecosystem. It's just not, right? And so don't fool yourself. And you can start creating returns of these concepts tomorrow.
Thanks, John. And then I think that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. It went a little bit longer than we thought, but hopefully that was useful. So yeah, the bottom line is the takeaway from this episode is the technology exists, the people exist, right? The information exists, and we need more synchronization. I guess we can move on to questions now. Some of the questions I couldn't answer just because of the flow. Maybe John, you can answer this, but concept of digital product passports. What do you think of the work being done on those sorts of things, right? I know Tana does it. I think Sayari does it. There's a whole bunch of supply chain risk management players that are doing this end-tier mapping of, hey, this comes from X location, so this is where we're going to be out. I think it comes back to your lead time example with Toyota, right?
Well, I was doing some work about a year ago where that came up, and again, that's treating a symptom to the problem rather than treating the problem, right? So you've got a big messed up digital supply chain for a defense product. How do I go research where my constraints are, where I'm buying stuff from China that's a problem? I largely think if you take the approach we talked about today, where you have a strong planning bill of material and a sales and operations planning capability that's interoperable across the network, you know where those constraints are, right? And you're actively managing them. You're not just buying some technology to go back and data scrub what you're already doing that can't change the operation. So that's my take.
Great. I mean, there's a lot of questions that have popped up. I don't know if you can go into the question sections. So let's see. I think people are talking about buffers. Explain to me how this deals with buffers, right? I mean, buffers is the company strategy. So what's coming in. I used to, obviously, when I was at Schlumberger, hold on to lots of buffers. But talk to me on what that can do.
Well, buffers aren't a bad thing, right? That's where the lean practitioners break in supply chain if you're lean and you have events or things you don't control outside your four walls, you can't continue doing business, right? And you may lose your entire business. So that's what things like sales and operations planning manage well, where you manage the demand and supply balance, and you understand where you're blind, where you need to have contingencies, and then you're constantly working to remove those. But if there's ever a metric that is a forward tell of your success, it's planning cycle time. I mean, what is the time it takes to pull in demand, pull in supply, net it, understand where the constraints are, and fix problems? Basically catch mistakes early. So everything we talked about today dramatically reduces planning cycle time and dramatically disincentives all the participants to do what we call as overriding. What I don't think the central poobah in planning is going to get the job done for me, I squirrel away some stuff just in case, right? Because remember, people generally get fired for having too much inventory. They get fired for not having enough.
That's right. A quick question that I guess I'm just going through the comments is there seems to be some disconnect around why command and control doesn't work or why it's needed. Maybe could you explain to that to some of the audience members?
I think that's the trick, right? Is I've worked for several public companies as an employee, and I've worked for hundreds as a advisor, a consultant, and it's only been a handful of them where I met the CEO or the CFOs that they didn't think they ran a little China or a little Soviet Union. I mean, it's the corporate mentality is people think of they control their company and it's their fiefdom, right? And that's just flawed logic in today's world. Is every company has to be interoperable with a broad network of participants, so if you think you're in command and control, you think a centralized planning system is going to work, you're going to be so badly surprised, right? In that, because when you hire somebody to outsource a production routing, say Medtronic has suppliers making key components for a pacemaker, they're not going to listen to your how you say they should plan the production. They're going to plan the production because they got other people they're making stuff for, right? And so you got to create a balance of what is centralized control with collaboration in the horizontal network, and that's missing. That technology to do that has just been abandoned.
Maybe I answer the next question, which is, but why have buffers grown? So, just an example, I met with the chief digital officer of a large German company, and they were adamant about, hey, let's complete our transformation before we touch anything else. And then last year, our team got a call to say, hey, we need help with inventory management. And it's like, okay, well, why do you need help with inventory management? You're just tracking everything. And basically, what they admitted was, you don't understand, operations has been buffering against all of our hiccups on the digital transformation side. And now we have $3.5 billion of inventory in the wrong location. And that inventory expires and goes obsolete very quickly, right? So hopefully that answers the question, right? Which is with these control towers, they take a little bit of time to build up. But in the meantime, the longer it takes to get these systems set up all on a single spot, you end up obviously, the operations is going against the system. And go ahead.
Well, in the sake of time, Ali, I think the absolute answer to what you're talking about is a rethink of the business model.
Yeah.
We have had 20 years or longer of businesses capitulating to China for build to stock, long lead time product, forfeiting short lead time advantage and build to order capability. And I think any business that's trying to compete with China, which really isn't lower cost, everything they make is subsidized by the CCP, right? So the only way you can absolutely destroy the competitive nature of the CCP's manipulative predatory markets. Look what they've done with EVs and cars the last 3 years. Is you have to take advantage of proximity to the customer and offer things that are more agile and more tailored to needs. So I would make the case that any business that has big inventories of the wrong stuff, they loaded up on red dresses thinking the ladies wanted blue dresses, they red dresses for Christmas and they want blue dresses. They need to think about that. They need to think about how do they keep things in a less than finished form and assemble them, build them, close lead time, put them in the hands of clients. And I think they can win massively. That's what we do with all of our industry efforts.
I think probably a last question, then we can open up to others, or we can just have discussions. One of the comments I've seen over and again is company governance, company governance, company governance. How does a system like this, I guess, meet company governance or get around it? Because as people are pointing out, inventory buffers and risk management is a corporate strategy, right? You're making the case that 75% of America is small businesses, and if people are put in charge from bottoms up, they can have even more of an impact. And I've seen it personally with our customers, where we go to the unit levels where nobody wants to touch because it's not, frankly, it doesn't make as much money. But the impact we're having there just by fixing outliers and sort of doing a little bit more coordination between the different units, it's delivering stuff that they haven't had in 25 years. But talk to me on that. I think this is like a big bottleneck, or
I've done that work at Fortune 10 CEO level on down. I understand, and nothing about sales and operations planning or make it has any impact on how you decide to govern your company. It could, because it dramatically shortens that planning cycle time and makes you much more transparent, and it helps you create new business models. But today, if you really study how your business is run, there's some guys working around your systems with spreadsheets and email. I guarantee you, and you give me 5 minutes inside a company, I'll find them, right? All you're doing is giving those people an enabler to help them do the job that's keeping the company on track. Now, once you start getting some momentum, there's all kinds of fabulous things you could do that increase your control, your transparency, your understanding. In our S&OP system, we have what's called a inventory bridge, which essentially is a graphic of a forward inventory income statement and balance sheet for the company, where we take the master plan and we can project it forward with the cost and pricing of each item, and we can forward project if this plan works over the next 6 months or year, what will your balance sheet or income statement look? Who has that today? I mean, you think about that. That's what a CEO wants. He wants the ability to walk into his shareholders and say, we have such cooperation and collaboration that our return on assets are going to go from 1 to 30, right? And if you don't believe me about return on assets being the correlation, go to a website called Macro Trends. Take any public accounting or public trading symbol. Go look at Intel. Intel over the last 15 years, their return on assets went to -5. If that's not a tell of bad good governance somewhere, right? Then take a look at companies like PACCAR, which I've done some work with. Amazing build-to-order truck assembly. They have a really solid return on assets around 8. It just keeps growing. They keep working this problem. So the enablers we're talking about just give the CEO, the management, the fiduciary of the business the ability to push out the agency cost, the fraud, the grift, the buffers, the unknown, and that's everybody wins. The employee wins, the shareholders win, the supply chain wins, the suppliers win. The Toyota production lean guys are able to operate on steroids because you can't do this with just being lean in one plant.
And that brings us to maybe just my comment, and I think a lot of people sort of stuck on this, right? Which is we've gone from the Henry Ford, there should be no warehouses, right, to the world is a warehouse picture. So talk to me about, and this is where a lot of people start, which is offshoring has resulted in cheaper goods with longer lead times, getting to the end consumer in the US. Mm-hmm. You're making the case for that short iterative lead cycles, right? That what DCRA essentially stands for is not only cheaper, especially for make-to-order businesses, but ultimately helps with reindustrializing the U.S.
I was early in my Booz Allen days. The virtual manufacturing world has always been a passion of mine, and I've worked on technology. It's a great thing. One of my businesses, we build to order classic cars. We built 350 cars over the last 15 years, build to order for people all over the world, right? I don't do upholstery. I mean, I have guys that assemble the whole car, but I take the seats, I buy the material, and I hand it to an upholsterer that knows how to sew, right? It's a great thing to be able to outsource the upholstery. Horizontal integration of building an airplane or a car or a robot, it's a great thing until you get screwed by predatory economies like China that use the naivety of the CFO or CEO running a business using GAAP accounting, and they go, oh yeah, no, we can build that stuff cheap for you. And then they suck all the IP out of your business, and 2 months later, they got a product in the market building the same thing. So I will rip and roar on the CCP in China. They have taken what was a great concept of horizontal integration and coordinated collaborative manufacturing, and they've destroyed it with predatory ways to fuel a very evil goal, right? China doesn't use supply chain to make sure all of you got cheap stuff at Sam's Club you can buy, right? They use it because they're trying to control economies and control behavior and network, and people don't understand the difference, but we can work with China if we have the right tools to manage what they do. For example, if I was running a business working with China, I wouldn't get anything in a finished form from them. I mean, okay, China, you can make a hard drive cheap, fine, I'll buy hard drives. But I'm not going to let you be the sole supplier of a hard drive, right? Yeah. I'm going to buy them from India or Mexico or Los Angeles, right? I would never have anything that's a finished good out of China, and anything I buy from China, I would be able to ramp up from someplace else, and then I would do final assembly in a friendly world, right? And that's not just the U.S. I mean, there are other great partners of free markets in the world that aren't going to be predators. So that's this whole discussion we've come back to is really a key part of what's happened to the supply chain world the last two decades or longer.
So John, just I didn't realize, but there's just an explosion of questions coming through on all channels. But one of the questions are, what are these patents you keep referencing, and are you planning to use them offensively or defensively? And
look, I only have created patents out of pure frustration that the market turned into this crazy centralized, the cloud. Everybody, so that our patents, our technology, you show up at my doorstep or give me a call and say, I want to help solve this problem. I'm going to let you use every single bit of our patents. I am neck deep in solving the problem, not trying to exploit technology platforms and play the Hotel California model. So call me stupid, call me not a good businessman. I don't care, right? I want to solve the problem that we started to solve. And I'm just embarrassed for the supply chain technology market that's turned it into an accountification nightmare.
Yeah. All right, and I think those are all the questions I've seen. And again, if you have questions, John wants to get to you. I know you prefer phone calls, but there's LinkedIn, there's the email that I put up. Maybe
Right.
parting words on your side.
Parting words is I'll repeat what I just said is I will bend over backwards, work 24 hours a day to help anybody who's really trying to solve this problem. And that means customers, industry, new business, small business, large business, software vendors that want to really solve the problem and break this cycle of blobs, right? Even the Microsofts and the Googles and the AWSs, I'd be happy to help you figure out a way that your platform becomes less of a blob and more of this interoperability. It's got to happen. If we don't make this happen, we will lose out as an industrial economy to planned predatory governance that it doesn't look good. It's got to be solved.
And to that note, right? So thank you all for joining today. This is probably one of the most interactive conversations we've had on LinkedIn Live, especially for a Saturday. If you have a follow-up, John and I will both be at Gartner, or expect to be at Gartner next week at the Supply Chain Expo. So come by, drop a line, and we'd be happy to talk to partners, potential customers, or just anyone who wants to talk about supply chain in a new way, right? I think it took me a couple of years, right? John and I used to have a lot of back and forth in 2021, just about like this whole centralized tower approach, which seemed to have been what I was bought into maybe when I was at Schlumberger back in the day, because that's what was sold from us from top down. But over time, there is a need for rethinking supply chains and really increasing the utility of our small business footprint, which is 75% of our economy, and that's really our strength, right? That coming back to that Adam Smith invisible hand. It's not the big corporations that ultimately get us what we need. And to John's point, like a lot of the primes are just assembling parts from other people, right? So the faster we can sort of collaborate with those primes or just larger companies to get the end user what they want, that's really where you have fulfillment, right? So thank you all again for your time. And this is recorded. So if you're looking for this link, we should be able to post it by next week and have it running. So and John, enjoy your day in Dallas, and good luck building more of those big systems and houses with Tube Creek.
Thanks. Take care.